Thank you all for joining. I will have the chat open right here. I'm going to do my best to keep an eye on it. I have some slides prepared for you all. I want to share some information that is going to impact your job search in 2026. So it is a pretty big update to my typical guidance around becoming an instructional designer. And we will have at least half of the session for Q&A. I have a team member, Nathan, here who will be keeping an eye on the chat and marking your questions. So as your questions come up, feel free to ask them. And for those of you who do have more experience, if you want to share that in the chat, feel free to help out the other people who are here. We'll have time at the end for some networking focused stuff. So welcome everyone. Let's dive into it. I'll show you what I have prepared for you here. So we're going to dive into what has changed in 2026 when it comes to becoming an instructional designer. We're going to talk about what has not changed, and we're going to talk about what actually works now. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Devlin Peck. I have been helping people break into this field since 2018, right after I got into the field. Since 2021, it has been my full-time job, essentially, creating a boot camp and now eventually a licensed career school called Peck Academy. So for the past several years, my primary professional experience has been working very closely with people making this transition. And so everything I'm going to share with you here has been based on the patterns I've been seeing from these job searches. So this is for you if you are serious about transitioning into instructional design. If you want clarity around the journey, right? This isn't like a hype motivational speech to get you super excited. This is the real deal about the market right now. And if you're willing to do hard, focused work, right? Back in the day, people were becoming instructional designers in a couple of months. That's not the reality anymore. It is going to take more time than that, and it is hard work. It's not an easy journey, but it is a rewarding journey. So it's not for you if you want shortcuts or guarantees, right? I'm not here to say, right, if you just use this one tool, you're going to get hired next month, right? It's not a shortcut. It's going to take a lot of work. If you're here to just learn the tools, again, this will not be the best session for you. There are better resources out there on deciding which tools to learn. Or if you're unwilling to get feedback, right? Feedback is a big part of this journey for a lot of people, to make sure that your work is aligned with what the market is looking for. So if you're not interested, if you're looking for that stuff, shortcuts, learning the tools, this isn't the best session. So my goal for you is by the end of the session, you will have a feel for the 2026 hiring bar, like what it takes to get hired today. You'll know where most people get stuck, so you can hopefully avoid that, and you'll see what a viable path forward looks like in the current job market. So what's the market reality right now? All right, the job market is not dead. I don't know if this is a very common narrative out there still right now. Ever since I got into the field, all the way back in 2017, people were afraid of oversaturation. I just pulled this up yesterday. I looked up instructional designer job title, posted in the last 7 days. We have 400 new jobs already in the new year in the middle of January, right? So there are plenty of opportunities out there. But the old playbook is dead, right? If you're going about the job market the same way we were suggesting people go about it back in 2020, it's going to be much, much harder to land a role, and you might not land that role. Expectations are a lot higher than they used to be, and differentiation matters a lot more. So the real problem we're dealing with now is not saturation, right? It's not, oh, the market's oversaturated, no one's landing work. It's everybody looking the same. Okay, so portfolios showing off the same tech skills, people using the same talking points in interviews, and everyone kind of blending together in this boring middle ground where hiring managers can't differentiate between, candidate A and candidate B. That's the problem we're facing right now. So the goal is to kind of get out of that middle ground, just differentiate yourself slightly. So let's take a look at what people were told. I played a role in this, right? Learn Storyline 360, build a portfolio, study ADDIE, apply strategically. And all of this is correct, right? All of this is still necessary. The only problem in 2026 is that it's not enough, right? Everyone's been following the same advice for 5+ years. It takes a little bit more now to stand out and go that extra mile to get hired. So this advice did work when there were fewer qualified candidates, expectations were lower, tools signaled capability, right? There was a period there where I was literally like, learn storyline, it's going to get you hired, because people who showed off storyline projects in their portfolio were getting hired in a month or two. It was very easy for a couple of years there. That changed, right? People realize, hey, you need more than tool capability to get hired. Rightfully so. There's a lot more to an instructional designer's work than just knowing Storyline 360. But because there was such a shortage of people who were strong with those tools, the opportunity was really, really ripe. And a lot of y'all can probably feel this one. Entry level actually meant entry level back then, right? And even these mid-level roles, when instructional designers got hired, it was expected. It's going to take, several months to onboard you, get you up to speed with our team, invest in actually upskilling you as an instructional designer. Whereas the market reality in 2026 is people are expected to add value on day one and get up and running with the org relatively quickly in most cases. So let me know if y'all have any experience with that, but that's been a big shift here too. I think AI might have something to do with that as well, which we'll get into a bit later also. So why it breaks down now, as we mentioned, the bar has moved, right? The bar is higher than it was. Tool knowledge is assumed, right? It's kind of the bare minimum to get on the playing field essentially. Portfolios look the same in a lot of cases. They show off some, informational storyline courses, and that's not enough to differentiate people. And hiring managers want to see judgment, right? How are you making the decisions that you're making? Also, AI accelerated the baseline. So AI can do pretty decent work at this point. It can write pretty solid scripts and stuff. Not as good of as an actual skilled, capable instructional designer, but for people who are a bit below average, AI can do better work than a lot of those instructional designers these days, so the baseline rose even more quickly because of what AI made possible. So what actually changed? Hiring managers expect more autonomy, right? You should be able to do the job on your own. That helps them feel more confident that you're going to be a strong investment. AI changed how work is done, and more candidates mean that there is stronger signal required to stand out and land that role. Okay, so what do hiring managers actually want? What is this hiring bar? We're going to spend a little bit of time here. So I already mentioned judgment, proof of thought, business context, right? Do you understand business context? Can you operate well within it? AI workflows and experiences, these can be a nice differentiator, and comfort with ambiguity. We're going to dive into each of these in more depth, and hopefully this will clear things up, but feel free to ask questions. We will get to them in about 15 minutes or less. So judgment, what you decided and why that decision makes sense, right? So good work where you show off your judgment on your portfolio is greater than a lot of work, right? 1 or 2 projects where you can justify your decisions is going to be a lot stronger than 5, 6, 7, 8 projects where you're just showing us the final deliverable. And to show that judgment, you want to show the trade-offs that you made, right? I chose to do X instead of Y. You want to show the intentional decisions that you made, right? Why did you decide to use AI for this interaction? Why did you decide to use tool A instead of tool B? Yeah, exactly. The why this, not that format. So being able to show that off in your portfolio and in your interview is going to go a very long way. Proof of thought, I'd say, is very similar to judgment. This is how you arrived at your decisions. So a little bit more process oriented. You want to show hiring managers how you think through these problems. So on your portfolio, that looks like including your design rationale, maybe justifying it with instructional design theory, for example. Constraints that you faced. This is a big one in 2026. Show us the constraints you're working with. You're not always going to get to work in a perfect world where everything goes your way, like we kind of assume with a lot of these practice projects. And then stakeholder considerations, right? Which considerations might have impacted your decisions? And rejected options. Which options did you choose not to include, right? We chose not to do X, Y, and Z because it would have extended the timeline, because it would have increased the budget, because it would have not been the right fit based on our learners' needs. And what changed after feedback, right? So iteration is a very valuable thing to show in your process write-ups on your portfolio. So what changes did you make based on feedback from your users, from stakeholders, from your peers, etc.? Next up, business context. Some of y'all who have worked in a corporate environment probably already have a strong advantage on this. I know a lot of people come from education. I think you can still see the parallels though. But ignoring business reality is just academic work, right? So creating a sample project that doesn't acknowledge that it's for real business, doesn't acknowledge some of these trade-offs that wouldn't need to be considered. We're just kind of doing a thought experiment almost at that point, which can work in some environments, probably isn't going to work if your goal is to get hired in the corporate world as quickly as possible. So you want to design for these constraints. That's a good way to think about working with this business context piece, right? The audience realities, okay? How comfortable is your audience with technology? What's the environment like where your audience is working? What's that context like? What's the language capability of your audience? What devices do they have access to? All of those pieces, you want to explicitly say how you're designing for that in your process write-up and when you're talking about your process in interviews. Budget and time limits, right? We're not in this, a lot of the times when we do a practice project, it's this perfect world where we have an unlimited time, unlimited budget. Let's just make it all happen. Sometimes your project can be even stronger if you do acknowledge that this needed to be done in 3 weeks. We had a very limited budget, so we used Articulate Rise, and here's how we approach the graphics, here's how we approach the content, here's how we incorporated AI to speed up our workflow even more. That kind of thinking and tailoring your solutions to these kind of constraints is very effective this year. Stakeholder goals, right? The VP needed this, so we tried to accommodate that by doing this other thing. Okay, and obviously, it can be hard for concept projects. I think, and we can get into this in the Q&A if we want. But for concept projects, I think there is room to imagine and show that we understand some of these other constraints and show how it would impact our decision making. So even though it's a concept project and there's not a real VP, I think we can kind of create these situations and these scenarios to show that, hey, if this situation does come up, I'm prepared to handle it, and here's how I would approach all of these conflicting constraints. And organizational trade-offs, right? In this case, we chose to maintain brand perception instead of speed. So we took an extra month to do this, with a better, to make sure the graphics are better aligned with our style guide, for example. So those types of things are also very valuable for showing you understand that business context. Smart use of AI, I think this is probably one of the biggest opportunities here, especially for people who are a bit more tech savvy or AI forward. Showing that you can use AI as a workflow accelerator here. So not just using it to generate content here and there, but actually using it to make your job significantly easier and faster. So conduct analysis more quickly, create prototypes more quickly, iterate faster, and just have better feedback loops overall. Right? Incorporating AI as part of your workflow, using it as a way to kind of get feedback as you go on these different pieces or quickly generate prototypes and things along those lines to get feedback from users faster. That makes instructional designers almost infinitely more capable than non-AI enabled instructional designers. So using AI in this way has been really powerful. And then also what works really well in portfolios we've seen is showing off this AI enabled learning. So creating smarter learning experiences that help people learn and work more quickly. So scenario-based role-play experiences, on-demand coaches, adaptive feedback. So that not only helps people learn a bit more deeply and a bit more quickly than if they were learning from a static, non-AI enabled e-learning experience, but it can also save the organization a lot of time and money because they might not need to pair them with human mentors or human coaches. And, we could kind of debate the effectiveness of that, but the reality is that a lot of orgs are using AI in this way, and it is saving a lot of time and money. So if you're an instructional designer who is kind of aware of the limitations and the, how to actually build this stuff and when it's best implemented, it can set you apart very well from someone who's still just kind of using ChatGPT to ask questions here and there like Google. And then finally, comfort with ambiguity. I think this one is like the sleeper hit of the bunch, but if you can demonstrate that you are comfortable working in these more ambiguous environments, it's going to make you a much safer bet than someone who does not show that capability. So you want to show hiring managers that you can work with incomplete information sometimes, conflicting feedback at times, right? How do you decide which feedback to apply? Changing requirements. Right? That will be the reality when you're working on your project. Sometimes you might be kind of a quarter of the way through it and then realize, oh no, we needed to use a different tool, or this tool isn't going to work for us. We have to switch to this other tool. Showing off that ability to think and be adaptable and just start moving without complete information and be able to adapt quickly, I think that is a very underrated skill in 2026. And then, being comfortable working when there is no single right answer. You can say, hey, we have enough reason to be confident this is going to help and make an impact, even if we can't say, do 3 months of research and say this will be right with 100% certainty. I think that's how a lot of teams are moving right now, is in this more ambiguous way. And then, I mentioned this earlier, most entry-level portfolios assume perfect information. So if you can incorporate some of this non-perfect information and show hiring managers how you handle it, how you deal with that non-perfect information, that's a gold mine of opportunity. So let's dive into this pattern, right? Most candidates blend in. They have these tools-only portfolios. They show, I can use Storyline, I can use Camtasia, I can use Rise, I can use ChatGPT. It's kind of like a list of tools. Very rarely is there business context, right? Sometimes we get into the process, which is good. Sometimes that's ignored. Decisions often aren't explained. And AI is used superficially at best. I think that still a lot of instructional designers aren't even showing off AI skills on their portfolio yet. So the path is not easy, right? I shared a lot today. I didn't even get into here are the core skills to learn. Here's the core theory to learn. I've been sharing that content for years. This is more about what's different this year. So in a way, it's gotten harder, right? There's more to learn. There's more to do to stand out. It does take a lot of time, right? It could take up to a year of upskilling. Ideally less, but it can take that long. And it is an uncomfortable journey, right? There will be uncertainty. There will be new tools or new things that come out that might adjust your journey halfway through. It can be hard, not knowing you have a guaranteed job at the end when you're investing so much time to upskilling. So it is a bit of an uncomfortable process at times. And it does require a lot of iteration, right? There will be times where you build something, you think, hey, this thing is done, and then you get some feedback and realize, oh no, I actually have quite a bit more work to do on this to make sure it's portfolio ready. So that can be a bit emotionally draining as well. So the risk isn't that there aren't going to be opportunities for you, right? There are opportunities, but there are still some serious risks that can stop you from landing those opportunities. So drifting without feedback, right? I've seen this time and time again. It kind of goes in with this next one, rebuilding the same projects repeatedly. A lot of the people who I see, they have a portfolio, they have some projects on there, they're applying to jobs and they're not landing interviews. A lot of the times what I see them do is create additional projects. So it's like, let me create another Storyline project. Let me create something that's more like game-based. Let's just keep adding to the list. And so it's a lot of work and rework, whereas if they were able to kind of refine the 2 or 3 projects they did have, they likely would have seen better results there. And then spending months preparing without improving. I see that a lot too. People kind of watching as many YouTube videos as they possibly can, coming to these live events, like going on LinkedIn, but not actually building projects and iterating on projects that are going to help them get hired and finish an actual portfolio. So those are some of the main risks that are kind of holding people back that I've seen. And I do want to talk a bit about this DIY versus structured support approach. So I've seen people start on their own because there are no external standards in the field, right? We don't have an external instructional design body saying this is what you need to do to become an instructional designer. Everyone needs to check all these boxes and then you get a job. It's not like that more in some fields, definitely not like that in instructional design. There's no accountability when you're on your own. And there's no feedback to calibrate your work with what the market is selecting for. So at this point, people are often in a couple of different camps. So on the one hand, people are like, all right, I see where the bar is. Let's get out there. I'm going to figure out how to get there. And then on the other hand, some people are like, I do not want to spend the next year trying to figure out how to do all of this stuff on my own. And that's okay. It's not that... it's not like a motivation or intelligence issue for people who don't want to do it on their own. It's just that without the right environment and structure and feedback and support to make this transition, it's almost impossible to know if the work that you're doing is aligned with what hiring managers are actually looking for. So you can definitely do it on your own. right? There is a ton of content out here. I do free content like this to help out with that. But I do want to share a bit more about our Peck Academy program for people who are in that second category who don't want to do that guesswork. And I'm sharing this also because applications are open today for our first cohort of 2026. So there are other programs, right? You do not need to join this one. I just want to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like in a program like this. I'm not going to spend very long on it. So the idea of this program is to replace guesswork with structure, right? We do have a repeatable process that kind of guides people through what it takes to land the role. The idea is to reflect the real hiring bar, because we do work with a committee, an advisory committee who does hold senior leadership positions in the field. I think Tanasha might even be here in the audience. I think she might have joined. And we want to make sure our curriculum reflects that. And just to reduce wasted time and effort and make sure that what people are working on does bring them closer to that actual job at the end of the effort. So again, not for everyone, no pressure to join. We're going to get to Q&A shortly. So what makes it different? This is not an online course where you go through and take some lectures, right? It's a licensed career school. We do have a structured curriculum. And I think the biggest benefit for people is the simulated work environment where you kind of go through, get hired as an idea on the job, have to deal with different stakeholders and business constraints and solve these performance problems essentially with all the tools in an instructional designer's toolkit. And then that continuous feedback piece can help a lot as well. Again, it's not easy applying that continuous feedback, but it does help people get closer to where they need to go. Overall, it's kind of like a portfolio plus skills plus thinking program. So we try to teach people how to think like instructional designers while building the skills and portfolio that will actually help them get hired. It's a 9-month program now. Back in the day when this was a boot camp and not a licensed career school academy, we would say, yeah, we can help you do this in 3 months, 3 to 6. If you're working full time, you can do this in 3 months is what we used to say. That is a much harder stretch these days. So again, where it used to be 6 months, now it's 9 months. Skill development does take time. The iteration is really important, not just to the learning process, but also to the quality of the portfolio sites at the end. And rushing those portfolio projects is definitely going to weaken the signals that you're sending to hiring managers. And the write-ups are just as important, if not more important, than the projects themselves in 2026. And then we do offer, some of y'all might have heard about this if you've looked into our program, we do offer that 100% tuition refund if people don't get hired within 6 months of graduating. So we do have some terms there around like applying to jobs, finishing the program, stuff like that. But we are able to offer that because outcomes are measurable when people follow this structure and process. Right, we have found that the structure here does materially change the odds of people's success, and we share the risk here. But fit still matters, right? If everyone here applies, it's not going to make sense for everyone. It does take a lot of that time commitment is the most important piece. And we want to recognize that we want to make sure that the people who apply recognize that piece of it. This isn't a guarantee that, hey, hop in here, you're going to get hired in 6 months. No, it does take a significant amount of work. So yeah, I just wanted to mention apps are open. We are beginning our first cohort of 2026 on February 2nd. We have 25 seats maximum. We might take even less than that just to make sure it's really focused, maybe around 20. It is application based and we are going for fit over volume here. So we want to make sure we have a really solid cohesive cohort and the people who kind of recognize the current reality and what it's going to take to get hired and make this work in 2026. So if you do want more details, we are doing a tour next week, same time. We'll do a full program breakdown. We'll do a live walkthrough, and most people come for this private Q&A in breakout rooms with current students and recent grads. So there we go. I'm probably not going to answer a ton of questions on this today. If people are more interested, just come to that tour tomorrow. I want to make sure I'm adding as much free value as possible in the next 30 minutes. But just know this is going on. I want to put this all on your radar. And with all that being said, I'm so excited to look at the chat and see what y'all have been up to over here, get into some good questions, and thanks for hanging out with me while I talk to you for 30 minutes straight. I'm going to sip some water and catch up with the chat. All right, let's dive into it. So did y'all already ask your questions? Let me figure out how to get to the questions tab. Nathan, you were marking them as questions, right? Oh, questions only. Let's go. Okay, I'm gonna just start answering, and Nathan, yeah, as more questions come in, just feel free to tag them over here, and I'll go through them one at a time. So first, we have a question from Lisa. Does a beginner still need to learn Articulate, or should we focus on AI tools instead? Articulate still is the most in-demand text skill right now, right? I don't know of many teams that have just abandoned the Articulate suite and they're just using Claude Code, for example, to generate e-learning courses on demand in pure code. That's not happening yet. So Articulate does still matter. It is still one of the kind of requirements to get into the playing field, right? Sometimes people will get hired without it, but in general, in most cases, that is going to be a must-have for corporate roles. They might use a different tool, but those tools are less popular, and it's not worth learning one of those less popular tools when Articulate Storyline is going to check so many more of those boxes. Articulate Rise is a good one to show off as well. It's easier to get started with. It's not going to differentiate you, but that's another good tool to show off when it comes to learning tools. So Articulate Suite, yes. Do not focus on AI tools instead of Articulate. I would say focus on AI tools in addition to Articulate. Might not be the answer you wanted, but for the best chance at success, you kind of got to have both of those in your toolkit. But good question. Audrey, does a master's degree help with getting a job? It can. I got a master's degree right out of undergrad, and I kind of was starting my freelance business right as I was doing my master's program. And it was a good thing to lean on when I didn't have any real previous work experience to count on, right? I had a part-time instructional design job. I had kind of done some customer service work for Apple. I was able to do some training stuff for them. But overall, I did lean on my master's degree because I didn't have much else, right? I was 22 years old. I was trying to land clients. So I was like, I need to pull on all the credibility I can get. So yes, it can help. I don't know if it is the most effective or shortest path to getting a job because your portfolio is going to be the differentiator. But, master's degrees, alumni networks can open up some pretty interesting opportunities. I landed one of my first higher paying client relationships through networking through my master's degree. So I'd say that the network for the degree is valuable. In certain industries, like in government, it can be a bit more valuable, or higher ed especially. But if your goal is to land a corporate role, master's degree couldn't hurt. It's not going to be probably the most effective ROI, but you will see an ROI. Yeah, good question though. Shawnee asked, do U.S. companies hire people who live abroad very often? I would say if you are a contractor, right? If you're looking for 1099 work, if you want to work as a freelancer or consultant or something along those lines, the odds are much higher. If you are looking to land like W-2 full-time U.S. employment and potentially get sponsored to come to the U.S., or even if you're not trying to get sponsored to come to the U.S., you want to work abroad as a W-2 employee, it is much more difficult. Yeah, much more difficult, very rare. If anyone else has a perspective on that, feel free to share it in the chat, but I don't think that's very common at all. My recommendation, if you were trying to work with US companies from abroad, would be to grow, start your own LLC, operate as a freelancer, and try to land contract work. There's plenty of contract work in the US. A lot of the people I work with, they go into things with the goal of working as a full-time instructional designer, but then as they're upskilling, they start landing contracts and getting freelance work, and then it kind of starts snowballing into more freelance work, and then they're like, why am I going to work full-time if I can kind of set my own schedule and work as a freelancer and make more money? And that was my route into it as well. I thought for sure I'd have to work as a full-time employee for a couple of years after my master's, but landing that freelance work, I landed like a $60K project right out of my master's degree, and I'm like, this is basically a full-time salary. I don't have to get a full-time job. I'm just going to keep going with this freelance thing. So don't underestimate the freelance work, but that's the path I'd take if you were living abroad and you wanted US work. All right, let's see. Sarah, a question I'm sure we can all relate to. How can I, as an instructional designer, overcome perfectionism, the obsession with making everything perfect? I want to go to the chat. And see if y'all have some perspectives on that. Because I feel like we could spend at least an hour talking about overcoming perfectionism, right? So, Sarah, I'm curious too if you want to elaborate any more on this. Are you talking about perfectionism for the work that you're doing for your client, right? Because I feel like the deadlines and stuff can help with that. For portfolio projects, it's even harder because we have to stop ourselves, essentially. Patrick says deadlines can be a big help. Yeah. Deadlines can be a big help. I'd say kind of reorienting yourself to the goal you're actually trying to accomplish, Sarah. So if the goal is, hey, well, this is on the job, we're trying to improve performance. Is this good enough to help people learn what they need to know to do the job better, right? Is it going to matter if every I is dotted and T is crossed? Or is this a good, viable product that's going to get people 95% of the way there? And, you could spend another month on it to get that another 3%. It's just not worth it at a certain point. So recognizing when those diminishing returns come in. I think there's a personal part of it, right? Like a part I've been experiencing this, if my work isn't perfect, if it's anything less than perfect, then I'm not enough, or it says something about me and my own self-worth. And so I think that's like a component of the perfectionism as well, of, kind of giving yourself permission to not be a superhero and recognize, hey, I'm allowed to be a normal human adult. I don't have to be perfect. I'm still worthy and valuable when I'm not perfect. I think that's a component of it. And then the part with, for your portfolio getting hired, right? I think that part is where it can make a little bit more sense, right? You want to make sure there aren't any glaring errors on your portfolio. You don't want a hiring manager or something to evaluate you based off of those mistakes. But I think the idea there is, maybe obsess over a project or two, obsess over the website, and at a certain point, you have to put it out there in the world, let it spread its wings, and hopefully land you a job. So I'd say if there's anywhere where the perfectionism makes a little bit more sense, it is on that portfolio site. But, to the point where the updates are actually going, as long as you're fixing errors and stuff and not just perpetually kind of redesigning the same layouts over and over or anything. Always, as your skills are developing, when you look at your past projects, you're going to see things to improve. That's just the reality. So just, kind of getting other people's eyes on it, getting some feedback, kind of saying like, is this good enough to help me land a role? I think that can help as well. So I'm going to take a quick look at the chat just because I think this perfectionism is something a lot of people in this field struggle with. All right, great. Thanks for the question, Sarah. I'm going to hop back over to the questions tab. Let's see, where should we go next? I see Ken has a question about AI. I think that's important in this day and age. What do hiring managers consider meaningful versus superficial uses of AI in a creative or technical portfolio? So I think in general, right, some hiring managers will still be figuring out the whole AI thing, right? Some teams aren't using AI. Some orgs are developing their own internal AI, which is significantly behind the modern AI tools that we can use for free in our browsers at home. So I'd say the most meaningful uses of AI are showing kind of how you're integrating it into your workflow, not just using it as a cherry on top thing, not as so much as a novelty thing. Like, oh, look, I made this, really fancy AI video that I put into this 60-minute information-based e-learning course. I think that might still be nice and kind of show some openness to AI, but that's different than someone who says, here's how I used AI in the analysis phase. Here's how I used AI in the prototyping phase. Here's how I used AI to facilitate SME conversation, facilitate my research. Kind of, I think, on the workflow side, showing how AI is embedded in these different pieces and how you are choosing different models for different tasks and using tools that work best for you for these different things. I think that, if you're using Claude for creative writing and one of these, GPT, one of OpenAI's thinking models for data analysis, showing that you kind of understand the landscape and are using these different models for different tasks, I think that is a bit more meaningful and deep than, I heard about this tool on LinkedIn and created this fun, animated video that, you can tell is very AI generated. So yeah, I think just trying not to use it so much as a novelty piece and really trying to embed it. Or again, the other side of it, which I think is even more evident in a portfolio and easier for people to grasp, is showing off these AI-enabled learning experiences. So inside the academy in these workshops, I always am encouraging people to start with a custom GPT, right? We've found that they are helping people on the job market very well. They're easy to create and they build some core AI skills without having to worry so much about the technical side of things. So I think if you're interested in that, I have a YouTube video like the #1 AI portfolio project for instructional designers or something along those lines. Check that out. Those are doing really well right now. A good question, Ken. All right, I see another good AI question from Carly. I want to switch it up a little bit. Rebecca has a question. How would I differentiate projects for a specific niche, such as diversity, equity, and inclusion? So far, I've done scenario-based learning. So Rebecca, you can definitely kind of position yourself in a niche. I think your portfolio website can do a lot of work on that, right? Like as soon as someone lands on your site in that hero section, you can say, right, designing diversity, equity, and inclusion learning experiences to ensure a more equitable workplace or something along those lines. So if you are going to really commit to a specialty or a niche, do that. You can do that on the whole site, right? Do that as soon as someone lands on your website, and focus your projects on that. So maybe you have a scenario-based learning on how to use more inclusive language. Maybe you have a custom GPT where someone can do a live practice experience where they're, kind of talking to someone and being careful not to use that kind of language, or coaching an employee who is not using, who is not being equitable or inclusive, and how do we coach them? So, a diverse range of projects that show off how you are solving problems specific to that niche. I hope that answers your question. I'm sure we could go deeper, but that's the idea. If you want to go that approach, I don't think you need to go that approach if your goal is to land a corporate role. But if you're doing a consultancy or really passionate about a specific niche or specialty, I definitely worth a shot. And opportunities will still come your way outside of that niche if your skill set is sharp. All right, we have a question from Tim. I know this is a very common question from working instructional designers. How do you add to or improve your portfolio when your latest organization doesn't allow sharing information or work? So, Tim, you are not alone in that. Almost no organizations allow this. As a freelancer, I used to kind of include it in the contract and say this is going to be, you get a discount for for letting me include it in my portfolio. It's going to be more expensive if you don't let me. And most times they still were like, yeah, no, that's the price then, because you're not showing off the work. So it's a very common challenge. My suggestion there would be to create a concept project using the same skills you've learned, right? It could be on a similar topic as long as you're not using the confidential information of your employer, and show off a part of that project. Right, maybe you rebuild some of the interactions you're most proud of. Maybe you rebuild one of the micro-learning modules from it, again, with more generalized information, different branding, but using the same skills that you learned. Show that off on your portfolio site. That's a good conversation starter in interviews, and say, oh yeah, that project was inspired by this, a much longer learning campaign I did at my workplace where we had to do X, Y, and Z. I just wanted to create a scrubbed sample so that people could see, some of the skills that I built working on that project, something along those lines. But yeah, you're not, you could always request, you could always ask your employer or your client if you can allow it, but 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be able to. It's more about showing off the skills, not so much their confidential work. But yeah, good question. I'm sure many others had that question as well. Okay, let's dive back into this AI question from Carly. What are the best AI tools to focus on to learn in addition to Articulate tools? Also open to being pointed to another resource that exists. What do you all think? I want to take a look at the chat. I've been kind of talking y'all's ears off for a minute. I'm going to go back to the chat window. I see a lot of good questions still coming in, so thank y'all for that. We're going to get to as many of them as possible. But let's see, Carly. There are some different directions to take this, right? I think the lowest hanging fruit is learning how to use ChatGPT really well. Or whatever your preferred model is. But, ChatGPT has the base ChatGPT. There's also the folders that you can use, which my team and I use very heavily, right? I have like a business coach folder that knows all of my business context. I have, we have folders to use with course development to help make sure that everything we're doing is kind of like aligned with the rest of the program. So building these folders to kind of create these instant feedback loops to, kind of augment our own intelligence, so to speak. But then there's also, and there's custom GPTs, which is really, really good as well. So that can kind of help you like learn, and ChatGPT has really good memory. So that's another plus if you kind of use we use like a separate work account than we do as like a personal account. So the work account has a lot of really valuable context and memory, which makes our lives significantly easier. Claude Code, that's a bit on the more advanced side. That is one of my favorite AI tools I've been using. It kind of has unlocked all of software engineering for me. So if I do need to build a custom HTML5 interaction for a course, I can generate it in a matter of minutes. I'm building a complete like business automation system for my business to help make our team's lives a lot easier. And I use a lot of instructional design skills to do that. So I kind of like interview people on my team and say, yeah, what are some hard parts of your job? What's taking up a lot of your time? And then I can actually build automations and systems that team member still needs to interact with, but that makes their life a lot easier, lowers error rates, lets us focus on the work we actually want to be doing. So that's something where, as an instructional designer, if you have that tool in your toolkit, it can be very powerful. But again, that's a bit more advanced. Any other suggestions? I'm seeing some other good suggestions in the chat. Replit, Jenny suggested. I think that's like, what's that new tool? There's another tool like that, Lovable, that, you know, those tools are a bit easier than using Claude Code, since that just generates like pure code. But those tools kind of let you build full stack web applications, so you can build tools for your audience that, you know, store data and have user accounts and things like that. So it's come much further. It's getting better every few months, it seems like. And then there's the media generating tools, which I see people suggesting. You know, Midjourney is a good one. OpenArt gives you a lot of fine control over media generation. FreePick is a pretty good suite, right? FreePick has been a favorite tool from instructional designers for years for finding assets. They've incorporated a lot of media generating AI models into their suite. So you can kind of quickly change models. Like Google's Nana Banana Pro is like the best image generating model right now that we found. Yeah, tons of tools. You're not going to learn them all. I would say kind of get comfortable generating media, see what goes into that, right? If you're working on a project, give it a try. Or at least check out Nana Banana Pro, see what's possible for generating visual assets. Yeah, I'd say know what's possible on the media front in case you're in a project where it's required, right? How to turn a still image into a high quality AI generated video clip, and you can kind of string those together and create very realistic looking scenes. But a lot of the productivity gains, I would say, come from the large language models, the text-based tools, using those to make your, you know, kind of take some of the cognitive load off of you as you do your work, so that you can make better decisions faster, I would say. That's the biggest win with the AI tools that I found. And the automation piece has been very life-changing for me, and is slowly revolutionizing our business. And I'm excited to share more about that with y'all in later sessions. This is not the session for that, but I get very excited about that. So good stuff. We could do a whole session on the AI tools as well. I'm going to hop back over to the questions tab. All right, good question from Joser. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. How important is it to know what sort of training to use? Instructor-led training, virtual instructor-led training, web-based training, right? Self-paced e-learning. I would say that is one of the most important things to know in this, slightly more competitive era of landing instructional design roles, right? If you can design those types of training, that's wonderful. You can find a role where, you know, an instructional designer who does specialize more in front-end work kind of hands these tasks off to you. But if you want to be trusted and comfortable with the whole process, that will be very helpful to know. And it's maybe not as difficult as you would think. A lot of that comes down to audience analysis and some training context analysis. It comes down to analysis in general, right? So knowing what tools do we have available to deliver this learning experience? Who is our audience, right? Are they comfortable using technology? Are they all going to be able to get off of work and become available for training at the same time? Or are they only going to get 10 or 15 minutes here and there, right? Do we have facilitators who can facilitate a virtual instructor-led training? Is our audience in different time zones? Are they in different countries? Are they spread out across a country? So it would cost us a ton of money to bring them all in person for an ILT experience. So those are a sample of the considerations you would make, but a lot of it comes down to asking good questions about your audience and the tools you have available to help them learn. And then trying to kind of empathize with them, put yourself in their shoes, I mean, you could ask them directly, but say, if this is what my workday looks like, if this is the resources we have available, what would be a good solution here? And then self-paced e-learning generally takes a lot more time to develop than an ILT experience. So that's an important consideration too. If you have 10 employees who need to learn something, are you going to spend months designing an e-learning that can be super scalable, or are you gonna, put together another training in a week or so? But if you have 100,000 employees, the scalability of the self-paced e-learning starts looking a lot better than trying to do logistics of a VILT experience. So again, just kind of riffing, kind of giving you some idea of what that thought looks like going into that. But I'd say everyone trying to become an instructional designer this year should feel very confident about how to make that decision on what modality should be used. Good question though. All right, we have a question from Annie. How to pivot from higher ed to corporate, any tips? I'd say there's usually a tech skill gap there, right? A lot of higher ed teams, if you're working with professors, aren't using Storyline, right? You're probably working in like your higher ed LMSs, right? Blackboard, Canva, stuff like that. Canvas? I'm getting them mixed up nowadays. I've been out of university for too long. So I'd say show off the tech skills. I'd say there's also a tone difference, right? Like I feel like in this might not be the case. I might be overgeneralizing, but when I was pretty entrenched in higher ed and doing research and stuff like that, and it was such an adjustment learning how to then write for a corporate audience and keep it more conversational and not use such heavily academic language, because again, personal, it's easier for people to understand when it is in a more conversational tone. So that was a big multi-year learning journey for me, I would say, is adjusting that tone there. But yeah, show off some sharp storyline projects, kind of demonstrate the business context piece of it that we talked about in this session, and try to brand yourself as a corporate instructional designer, even though you have that academic experience. If your portfolio is showing off all of these higher ed projects, it's not going to be sending the right signals to corporate hiring managers. So it's going to be painful, right? You might have projects you're really proud of. I would say, again, keep the portfolio very corporate focused, even if you're only including projects on there that you're building for this corporate audience and you're not showing off your higher ed projects. It's not going to send the right signals in my experience. But good question, Annie. Thank you. All right, let's see. I'm going to check in with the chat really quick. I see we have more questions here. We have about 9 minutes or so I think we could probably get through a few more questions. I just always feel like, I want to make sure I'm not missing follow-ups and stuff like that. All right, good stuff. I'm going to hop back over to the questions. Okay, I'm just going to go down the list. Joshua, I'm currently working as a graphic designer and instructor. Is it a good move to do a transition to being an instructional designer? Oh, that's quite a personal question, Joshua. I'd say why is that transition speaking to you? If you're passionate about helping learn, if you're feeling most called to that, and you like that design background, I'd say this is a very good combination of those two skills you mentioned, right? Like instructional design is a really good mix of writing, right? Because there's some creative writing involved. There is tech skills involved, right? You need to kind of work well on computers for a lot of these roles. Deep empathy and care and concern for other people, because you are designing experiences to help them do their jobs better. And the better you understand and can relate to them, the stronger your solutions will be. So that design thinking piece in general, right? Here's that problem solving piece. Here's a problem. Here are all the different factors. How do I design a solution to actually move the needle on this thing, to actually make an impact? So if that's important to you, I'd say this field is really strong. You kind of lose out on that face-to-face interaction with students. You don't get as much of that. You don't get to see those aha moments, but I've talked to plenty of instructional designers who are in a position where they have a lot of autonomy at their organizations. They do have a really good relationship with the audiences they serve, and they're loved by the audiences they serve, right? They're really appreciated by them. They get like fan mail from them, fan emails. So yeah, I'd say that, is more rare. It does take a really passionate team with, the freedom to kind of deliver on that kind of direction. But yeah, there are some teams that really do make an impact in the lives of the people they serve. So yeah, I rambled a little bit, but in general, when I see graphic designer and instructor, I'd say yes, ADDIE would suit your background very nicely, and you would enjoy it. All right, I see a question from Simone about job titles in Europe. Job titles seem more fragmented in Europe and less standardized. Beyond instructional designer, which roles or keywords would you recommend searching for on LinkedIn to find relevant opportunities? Good question. I don't have a comprehensive list on hand right now, but I'm sure with the help of the chat, we can list a bunch of them. Curriculum designer, curriculum developer, learning consultant, e-learning developer, L&D specialist. Some of those roles are more ADDIE focused. A multimedia developer. Some of those are L&D focused. Instructional designer, instructional systems designer. I think I already said learning consultant probably. Performance consultant. Any other ones? Let me see the chat. I mean, obviously there are more. I think those are the main ones. Learning experience designer. Yeah, that's another main one that I missed. Thank you, Joser. Yep, that's a big one. Customer education roles. Yeah, good one, Heather. Yeah, a lot of customer education roles that would really value instructional design backgrounds. Good stuff. Nice crowds. L&D trainer. Yeah, some trainer roles can be more ADDIE focused, but those might involve more facilitation as well, where you are in front of the audience. But good stuff. Thanks for all the help there. All right, we have a question from Carla. I'm a full-time teacher looking to pivot. I'm wondering how to use LinkedIn in a way that doesn't make it obvious to my current employer that I'm looking to leave, and how can I make my portfolio look realistic even when it's made up of concept projects? Will that bother potential employers? Thank you. Good question, Carla. That is a common concern I've heard over the years. I don't know if there is an amazing answer to it, right? That is an added layer of anxiety, I guess, or constraints around what you can share on LinkedIn. I do think you can still kind of share the work that you're creating, right? You don't have to post and say, hey, I'm open to work. I need an instructional design job, but I think you can still share some thought leadership around instructional design. You can still share some e-learning projects and things along those lines, right? Maybe it could be pieced together. Maybe if your employer is like, wait, why are you sharing an e-learning project around HR best practices? What's going on here? That might be an uncomfortable conversation, but I would say just try to, yeah, maybe you won't be able to share as much transparency around your specific journey, but you could still try to share some thought leadership, some stuff that you're learning while you're creating these e-learning projects, while you're learning these skills. You don't necessarily have to say why you're learning those skills, right? Share helpful takeaways you have from Storyline 360, from creating a project like this, and maybe just have an answer for that, right? I've found out about this field. I'm really interested in it. I'm kind of just, I'm sure you can come up with some kind of narrative there. I don't have a great answer for that. You could kind of hold out on LinkedIn until you have built some of those skills. I think it is really valuable working out loud, but yeah. And then to your second part of the question, making your portfolio look realistic with concept projects. Most of the people that we work with are doing concept projects to get hired. So that is not going to disqualify you by any means. It's more about showing that you can think through this stuff well, right? If your concept project is, hey, I made this. Well, first of all, you want to create a concept project that's solving an actual business problem. I think that's a very important part of this because, again, it's showing off that you know how to think through these problems. You know how to pair solutions to performance problems or performance gaps. You know how to identify if there's a performance gap in the first place. So saying, here's a concept project I made for a random company, and it's like a animated video about how to, provide good customer service, that's going to be received very differently than if you said, here's this project I created to solve this problem that I identified, right? Maybe these teachers aren't communicating well with parents, and I recognize this is a problem. This is causing a real problem for the school and the school district. It's costing them money. We needed a solution fast. We needed a solution before the new school year was in place. It needed to work for teachers where they could take it on their planning break from their laptops. So here's the tool I decided to use. Like getting into it in that way, as long as you're kind of showing off, here's how I thought through this real world problem. Here's why this solution will help resolve it. And here's the solution for you to go and experience to see that I have that part of the skill set as well. That's checking all the right boxes, right? Maybe maybe there will be a little bit of hesitation, like, oh, have you done this for a real company or not yet, right? Obviously you can't say yes, but you're showing that you have the right skills. You should have the confidence by that point to do it for a real company. So yeah, and you know, as you kind of might have seen from an earlier answer, even experienced instructional designers need to show concept projects on their portfolio because the work they do is confidential. So you're not at a big disadvantage there, right? A lot of people will kind of find, if friends or family members own a business, right, work at a nonprofit, kind of, you know, if there is an in that you have where you can create something for a real org, even if you're not getting paid for it, that can help with your credibility a lot as well if you're concerned about the not having done work for a real audience before part of it. But great questions. It looks like we are just about out of our time here. I'm going to hop back over to the chat to thank you all for spending all this time with me. I think I might have a little bit to share with you. We're thinking about next steps. If you do want that structure and feedback with me and my team, you can apply at peckacademy.com. Applications just open for this next cohort. And if you're interested, but you're still not quite sure, please join us at the tour next week. We're going to get into a lot of good stuff. You're going to be able to talk to all of our students. I'm going to share even more detail about some of the stuff we talked about here. So clarity is greater than motivation. So you know the bar, pick a path, whether it's self-paced or in a structured program like Peck Academy, and commit intentionally. You will be able to do this. I will be here to help in whatever capacity I can. And I really appreciate you all showing up today and hanging out with me here until the end. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. I'll see some of you next week for the tour. And again, I appreciate you all being here. Have a good one, everybody. Bye-bye.